Now, Madam President, on taxes. My Republican friends have stretched into day two of their debate on the bill, which still lacks resolution of some critical issues. After promising over the past few months that their tax bill would pay for itself through economic growth, the Joint Committee on Taxation came out with a report yesterday that showed that these promises were unfounded, way off the mark. Even considering economic growth, the Republican tax bill will add roughly $1 trillion to the deficit. And many have said that this dynamic scoring, many economists have said, doesn't work at all. Here, the JCT gave credence to the theory of dynamic scoring, but then came out with a number that was not the kind of wild exaggerations we're hearing from the Secretary of Treasury, from the President, and from some of our Republican colleagues, particularly those of the Club for Growth bent. Earlier in this debate, Republicans claimed that this would be a tax cut for everybody and that nobody in the middle class is going to get a tax increase. Independent analyses showed that these claims were not valid, and to their credit, some Republicans corrected the record. Now, Republicans have gotten the dynamic scoring that they have demanded for years. They're in charge. They put dynamic scoring in place. It's still not good enough. As recently as this week, the Republican leader and others claimed that this bill would not add to the deficit. We know now that even under the dynamic scoring method the Republican Party asked for and received, this bill would add $1 trillion to the deficit. All of the claims that tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations will pay for themselves were not correct. It's time for my Republican friends to admit the error and come clean with the American people. The fact that we received the dynamic score only a day before a final vote on the bill shows just how foolhardy it is to rush a bill like this through. From press reports, we know that the Republicans are making the pass-through provisions more generous, widening what was already a gargantuan tax loophole for wealthy business owners. Why should wealthy business owners pay a significantly lower rate on their personal income, because they're paying no corporate tax if they use the pass-through, than the average American? That's what this bill does. Hedge funds, big fancy law firms, lobbyist firms would all get a lower rate than the average American because of the pass-through. So the average American who makes $100,000, $200,000, who's already paying in the 30% range. From press reports, you'd think maybe Republicans would be concerned by the many reports that their bill increases taxes on 60% of middle-class families by the end of the day. Nope. Instead, the holdout Republicans are concerned that this bill isn't generous enough to corporations and wealthy business owners. And so now the Republican leadership is working to fix that. In the waning hours, this bill is tilting even further towards business, even further away from families. Every time the choice is between big corporations and families, the Republicans choose the big corporations. And still, no one knows what the final bill will look like. Why on earth wouldn't you want to spend more than a few hours looking at a bill of this magnitude? What might have been snuck in? What might have been changed by mistake? Innocent mistake. There are so many reasons to not rush this bill through, but we know why it's being done. We know why Republican members will only have a few hours at most to read the draft legislation before voting on it. If notching a political win, I would say to my colleagues, isn't a good enough reason to throw common sense and legislative responsibility out the window. Notching a political win isn't good enough to raise taxes and premiums on millions of middle-class families when there is a much better bill to be had by working in a bipartisan way, Democrats and Republicans, across the aisles together. My Republican friends must know that, quote, we needed to notch a political win isn't a good enough excuse for a constituent who asks, why you voted to raise their taxes but slash them for big corporations. Today may be the first day of a new Republican Party, one that raises taxes on the middle class. The one thing Republicans always promise the middle class is, we're not going to raise your taxes. A good number of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle, Senator from Texas, I heard him talk about, the junior senator from Texas, said he doesn't want to raise taxes on any middle class person. But this bill does it. The Republican Party is abandoning its long-held principles to please its political paymasters. It's a bad move for the Republicans, as well as a bad move for America. Again, we needed a notch. We needed to notch a political win. Is going to be no excuse when your constituents complain why they are getting the short end of the stick in this tax bill, and wealthy corporations, richest people, are not. So, Democrats remain united against any middle-class tax increase, and we will fight to reverse that. The stakes are too high. Our economy is already stacked against working men and women. Corporate profits and stocks have reached all-time highs. The top 1% captures 20% of the national income, higher than any time in our history since the Roaring '20s. Meanwhile, to too many Americans, the American dream is slipping away. Hard-working Americans who get up every morning worried about paying the bills, making the mortgage payment, the tuition payment, the health care bill, they're not getting the help they need in this bill, and instead it's going to the wealthiest, biggest corporations on a theory of trickle-down, which almost everyone except some right-wing economists agrees has never made sense. Any moral tax bill would focus on giving a leg up to middle-class Americans, to working-class Americans. Instead, this bill directs the lion's share of its benefits to those at the very top, the already wealthy, the already powerful. It makes health care less affordable and less accessible. It'll deprive the government of the resources needed to support the military, scientific research, education, and infrastructure. The hole it blows in the deficit will, make no mistake, endanger Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Republicans, including President Trump, have openly admitted they will seek changes in this program after the tax bill. Senator Sanders has outlined eloquently how dangerous this bill is to the future of Social Security and Medicare. And I know our Republican colleagues came down to argue against him. We're all on the defensive. All the things our president and Republicans say they wanted to do are not happening. And this bill moves in the opposite direction, not only on helping the wealthy and not helping the middle class in the way it needs, but also in endangering Social Security and Medicare. Most insidious of all, the bill hides a ticking time bomb of middle-class tax hikes at the center of our tax code. Who could want to vote for that? Many of my Republican friends feel the hard right, big wealthy corporate interests will put these ads on TV saying the bill helps the middle class. That's not going to work. When the middle class gets a tax increase, they're going to know why, and they're going to know who to blame, and these ads will have faded into the ether. Today, Madam President, my Republican friends can choose to cement their party as the party that raises taxes on the middle class. It'll be a dramatic turning point in a downward spiral for the Republicans. It's something they've never believed in before. Or Republicans have an alternative. They can step back from the brink, work with Democrats on a bipartisan tax reform bill to deliver across-the-board tax relief to the middle class, a bill that makes our businesses more competitive while closing egregious corporate loopholes, that grows our economy without adding a penny to the deficit. Bipartisan tax reform, not this cynical bill, not this partisan exercise, not this bill that seems to please the 1% but not the rest of America, is possible. But only if my friends and colleagues abandon this bill and reach out for a better kind of politics. I yield the floor.
Senator from Wisconsin.
Madam President, I rise to offer a motion and an amendment to do something that this tax plan fails to do. Make good on President Trump's promise to close the carried interest tax loophole. This amendment has the support of Senators Whitehouse, Donnelly, and Van Hollen. I think that we need to make our tax system simpler and fairer for hardworking families, businesses, particularly small businesses, and manufacturers. And that's what I've been working for. Unfortunately, this is not the plan being presented today by Senate Republicans. Let's be honest with the American people. This bill is largely a tax giveaway to the wealthiest few and big corporations, while millions of middle-class families will get a tax hike. With this partisan bill from across the aisle, big corporations get permanent tax breaks, permanent, while middle-class families will see tax increases. In fact, most Americans earning less than $75,000 a year will see tax increases. And that is simply not fair. It's also not fair that the top 1% will end up with over 60% of the benefits, and in exchange, 13 million more will lose health insurance. Healthcare premiums will increase by 10%, and Medicare and Medicaid have been put on the chopping block to pay for it. In addition, with the Senate Republican plan, powerful corporations can still deduct their state and local taxes, but they completely eliminate the state and local tax deduction for individual taxpayers. This deduction ensures households aren't taxed twice by the federal government on money they have already paid in state and local taxes, including property taxes. But with the current Senate plan, nearly 1 in 3 Wisconsinites will lose their personal income, sales, and property tax deductions.